So when we look at this question where we're asked to graph the function g of x equals 4 to the x minus 2, we need to recognize that that function belongs to the family of other exponential functions in the form f of x equals b to the x, where b is 4 in this case. So we recognize first that in front of the 4 is not a number, so we know that there is an imaginary 1 there. And therefore, that tells us that the parent function will have to pass through the point 0, 1, as we've discussed previously. If we were to substitute 1 in for x, then 4 to the 1 power is 4. And we could continue to substitute other values in for x as well, but that'll give us enough for us to identify what this exponential growth curve looks like. So if I plot that point at 0, 1 and the other point at 1, 4, knowing that all exponential functions have an asymptote on the x-axis, then our growth curve would look something like that. But we have to recognize that in our function, we have a minus 2. Now at the minus 2, it's not being taken away from the x, but rather it's being taken away from 4 to the x power. So what that means is it's going to make our function, or our graph of function g, slide down 2 places. So it's not going to be moving right or left. To do that, that minus 2 would need to be up with the x. It would either need to be x plus 2 in the exponent or x minus 2. It's not in the exponent with the x. So it has to affect the y movement, which would be up or down. And because it's minus 2, it has to move down. So what that would mean in this case then is that if I go to graph this function g of x, I can just take the points that I have and slide them down 2 places. So that 0, 1 would now be at 0, negative 1, and that 1, 4 would now be at 1, 2. In addition to that, our horizontal asymptote would also have to slide down 2 places. So now instead of it being at y equals 0, our horizontal asymptote is at y equals negative 2. Our function then would look something like this. Okay? So now the question is, what is the domain? Well, the domain is all about how far left and right the graph goes. And we can tell that it's going to go on forever into negative infinity, and it's going to go on forever into positive infinity in the horizontal direction. So our domain is always about the x. And so our domain would be all real numbers from negative infinity to positive infinity. And in using interval notation, we know that that would look like this. But our range is all about the y's. And there's a horizontal asymptote at negative 2. That means that the y value on this exponential growth curve never ever gets to negative 2. So it gets really close to negative 2, but it doesn't get there. So our range does not include the number negative 2, which is why I'm using a parenthesis here instead of a bracket. But in terms of how high the graph will go, it's going to continue on into positive infinity. So the upper end in interval notation of our range would have to be positive infinity.